January 1943. North Atlantic night. A thin crescent moon hangs above a restless sea, its surface broken only by the slow rise of icy waves. A German U-boat captain stands in the conning tower, scanning the darkness through frozen binoculars. No engines heard, no silhouettes seen, nothing on the horizon. Yet, within minutes, American destroyers close in with impossible precision, as if guided by an unseen hand. The question now becomes, how did they find him? To understand why German captains were stunned at sea, we must step back to the years before the Atlantic War reached its peak. By the late 1930s, every major naval power understood that the next conflict would hinge not only on firepower, armor, or range, but on the ability to detect the enemy first. The oceans were vast, visibility was unreliable, and night engagements often favored whichever side could find its opponent before being seen. Germany entered the war with confidence in U-boats, wolf-pack tactics, and the reach of its periscope-based doctrine. Surface fleets relied on lookouts, sound operators, and signals intelligence. Even the most skilled captains believed detection at sea remained a contest of human senses. The United States, however, had already taken a different path. Years before open conflict, American researchers at the Naval Research Laboratory and MIT Radiation Laboratory were experimenting with a new radio-based detection method, one that could see far beyond the limitations of the naked eye. By 1940, early shipboard radar sets, like the CXAM series, were being fitted on carriers and cruisers. The technology was still rough, still evolving, but its promise was clear. It could spot aircraft in foul weather and locate ships long before lookouts raised an alarm. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, this technology accelerated. By mid-1942, newer models, SG surface search radar in particular, were being installed rapidly across destroyers, cruisers, and soon escort carriers. For American captains, radar became an extension of their senses, a silent watchman scanning every direction, regardless of darkness or storms. German naval intelligence knew radar existed, but they underestimated how quickly and widely the Americans could deploy it. They believed radar was bulky, unreliable, and limited to large capital ships. Captains at sea still trusted the old understanding. If a U-boat ran silently at night, with no lights, no wake, and minimal surface exposure, it should be nearly impossible to detect until it was too late. But by 1942, the oceans were changing. Radar was beginning to rewrite the rules, and American ships were learning to hunt in ways the Germans never expected. By early 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had entered one of its most dangerous phases. German U-boats operated aggressively along convoy routes, often surfacing at night to attack with torpedoes before slipping back into the deep. For months, these tactics worked with brutal efficiency. Merchant vessels burned against the black horizon, and escort ships struggled to locate attackers that vanished into darkness. German captains believed they understood the rhythm of the ocean war: strike at night, retreat before dawn, and rely on stealth as their greatest shield. But something began to shift as 1942 progressed. Convoys that once seemed blind in the dark started maneuvering with new purpose. Escort destroyers, instead of reacting slowly to torpedo flashes, began angling toward U-boat positions before any visual confirmation. On moonless nights, traditionally the safest window for U-boats, American ships were turning sharply, closing distances with uncanny accuracy. Some captains reported hearing destroyer screws accelerating directly toward them, even though no periscope sighting had been made. Across the Atlantic, from Iceland to Newfoundland to the waters near Greenland, German signals officers noticed patterns. American escort groups were coordinating more fluidly, engaging earlier, and responding faster than expected. The U-boat arm under Admiral Karl Donitz sought explanations. Was Allied code-breaking responsible? Were aircraft relaying positions? Or were patrols simply getting lucky? Still, German doctrine insisted that surface ships could not detect a submarine running at low profile on a black ocean. That belief shaped everything, from attack patterns to evasion tactics. What the Germans did not fully realize was the speed at which American naval radar was advancing. The SG radar, compact and powerful, allowed destroyers to detect a U-boat conning tower-sized target from miles away, even in fog or rain. For the first time in naval history, night no longer belonged to the attacker. And as this quiet, technological shift unfolded across Allied fleets, German captains at sea found themselves facing a battlefield they no longer recognized, one where the enemy could see through darkness itself. This changing reality sets the stage for the deeper angles behind the story. For American sailors, radar was more than a device. It was a new form of confidence in a war where uncertainty ruled every mile of ocean. Young operators, many trained for only a few weeks, sat before glowing green screens, deep inside destroyers, their hands steady on dials as they interpreted faint echoes. Officers who once relied completely on lookouts now studied radar plots before making decisions. Commanders learned to trust these silent signals, even when the night outside was pitch black and no man could see more than a few meters. This trust reshaped the psychology of naval leadership. Captains who mastered radar tactics began coordinating escort groups with a precision previously impossible. What had been instinct and experience became a fusion of human judgment and electronic sensing. Radar did not remove fear, it clarified it. Sailors still understood the stakes, still knew that the ocean gave no mercy. But they now had a tool that offered a fighting chance against unseen threats. For German commanders, this shift felt deeply personal. They were veterans of an earlier doctrine built on stealth, discipline, and surface agility. Yet their training suddenly clashed with a new battlefield where the enemy could detect them without light or sound. Many captains wrote in logs that they felt hunted by ghosts, unaware that the ghosts were radar pulses sweeping across the sea. Radar changed more than morale. It reshaped tactics at their core. Before radar, night engagements favored the attacker, usually the U-boat, because the defender had to rely on human sight and sound. But SG radar inverted this balance. Destroyers could now locate a submarine long before a torpedo crew finished calculations. A faint blip on a radar scope could trigger a coordinated turn, a pursuit, or an immediate depth charge attack. Radar also enabled the formation of radar pickets, escort ships placed at distances where human eyes would have been useless. These ships scanned vast arcs of ocean, feeding positions to convoy commanders and sealing gaps that U-boats once exploited. Tactics became proactive rather than reactive, and it was this new tactical landscape that German captains struggled to understand, setting the stage for the deeper strategic angles ahead. From the German perspective, the sudden effectiveness of American night operations was alarming. Early in the war, German naval scientists knew radar existed, but they believed Allied sets were limited in range and accuracy. Their confidence rested on the assumption that a U-boat's small silhouette, barely a few meters of exposed conning tower, was nearly invisible to radio waves at long distances. But by late 1942, reports from returning U-boat crews told a different story. Destroyers were appearing without warning, approaching from angles previously considered safe. Surfaced U-boats, which typically used nighttime hours to recharge batteries and cover distance, were forced to dive more frequently, reducing their operational reach. In response, Germany deployed the METOX radar detector, a small device meant to sense incoming Allied radar emissions. Crews initially celebrated it as a breakthrough, but hope soon faded. METOX could detect older Allied sets, but it failed to pick up the newer short-wavelength American radar systems. To many German captains, it felt as though their detectors had gone blind, offering no warning before American destroyers closed in. This technological mismatch laid bare a strategic truth. Germany had underestimated the pace of American radar innovation, and now its commanders were paying the price. Warfare at sea is shaped as much by emotion as by steel. Radar introduced a new psychological dimension. For American crews, the dark ocean, once a place of vulnerability, became a battlefield they could read, measure, and predict. The unseen enemy was no longer completely unseen. For Germans, the emotional impact was the opposite. The ocean, which had once been their shield, now felt exposed. Many captains wrote of nights filled with tension, scanning horizons that gave no clue of approaching danger. A destroyer that appeared out of nowhere was not just a tactical threat, it was a blow to morale. Veterans of earlier campaigns struggled to accept this new reality, where technology could erase the advantage of experience. Radar did not just shift tactics, it altered the mental landscape of the war at sea. And these emotional pressures would soon collide with a moment that defined the turning point. The turning point came in the brutal winter of 1943, during a series of convoy battles that revealed just how dramatically radar had shifted the balance at sea. One engagement in particular, Convoy ON-166, showed German captains that the Americans were fighting with tools far beyond their expectations. It was February 1943. Heavy fog rolled across the North Atlantic, thick enough to swallow entire ships. Convoy ON-166 consisted of more than 40 merchant vessels, protected by a mixed Allied escort group of destroyers, corvettes, and the increasingly invaluable American destroyer escorts, many equipped with the SG surface search radar. For U-boat commanders, this weather should have been a blessing. Fog meant concealment. Fog meant safety. Fog meant opportunity. 11 German submarines had been directed toward the convoy, confident they could strike from multiple directions under perfect conditions. But something was wrong from the very start. Shortly after midnight, U-604, under Captain Lieutenant Horst Holtring, approached what he believed was a vulnerable flank of the convoy. Visibility was nearly zero. The crew strained to hear any hint of engines, any sign of ships breaking formation. Instead, the hydrophones carried only faint, scattered noise. The ocean felt empty, too empty. Minutes later, an American destroyer escort, USS Campbell, altered course sharply. Not by chance, not by sound, not by sight. A radar operator deep inside the ship had detected a small, inconsistent return at long range. A signature barely large enough to stand out from sea clutter. But it was there. Campbell accelerated. The crew moved toward battle stations. Above deck, nothing suggested danger or contact. To the naked eye, the ocean was blank. Yet radar told a different story. Aboard U-604, Holtring sensed the shift too late. An unexpected sonar ping, followed by the distant thrum of approaching screws, cut through the fog. The destroyer escort burst through the haze like a ghost given form, its silhouette rising out of nothingness. Depth charges soon followed, precise, patterned, and devastatingly close. Holtring escaped that night only by diving deep and retreating, but the message was unmistakable. The Americans were no longer guessing. They were tracking. They were hunting with unseen eyes. This was only the beginning of a larger confrontation, one that would fully reveal the strategic fracture opening in the Atlantic. The events surrounding ON-166 were not isolated. As winter turned to early spring, the Atlantic became a proving ground for the new radar-driven warfare. By March 1943, the Germans launched one of their largest coordinated efforts against Allied shipping. Their aim was simple: overwhelm escort screens and force the convoys into confusion. Yet the Americans were now fighting in a different dimension, one where radar shaped every decision. Convoy SC-121 provided the clearest demonstration. March 6, 1943. Winds howled across the North Atlantic, the sea towering in chaotic walls of water. The convoys struggled to maintain formation as several ships drifted out of alignment. U-boats detected the gaps and prepared to exploit them. Under ordinary circumstances, this would have been catastrophic. Reduced visibility and broken formation usually meant easy targets, but this time, the Americans had a weapon that compensated for the storm. The USS Bory, a destroyer equipped with the SG radar, detected multiple faint contacts long before lookouts could see anything through the spray. The radar scope flickered with blips, some false, some real, but trained operators could distinguish between drifting waves and steel hulls. Slowly, the picture formed. several U-boats approaching from the northwest. Bori turned to intercept. Gun crews stood ready, unsure of what exactly they were engaging. To them, the night was a blank sheet of roaring darkness. Only the radar operators knew the truth. Hostile vessels were closing fast. Across the German Wolfpack, confusion spread. Kapitän Lieutenant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann of U-405 recorded in his log that Allied escorts maneuvered with inexplicable foreknowledge. His crew believed aircraft must be overhead, yet the sky was empty. No engines, no searchlights, only the sea. As Hauptmann prepared an attack run, Bori's radar fixed his position. The destroyer charged in with deliberate, unhesitating precision. Flares burst into the sky, revealing the U-boat in harsh, white arcs of light. Gunfire followed, then depth charges that struck with crushing force. U-405 was forced to break off and dive for survival. Across multiple contacts that night, American escorts repeated the same pattern. Radar detection, rapid maneuver, targeted aggression. One by one, U-boats failed to penetrate the convoy's shield. In those hours, the German assumption of nocturnal dominance collapsed. Radar had rewritten the laws of engagement, and with that shift came consequences that would shape the remainder of the Atlantic War. The months following these convoy battles revealed a dramatic transformation in the war at sea. For the first time since 1940, U-boat success rates began to fall sharply. What German captains had assumed were isolated incidents became a consistent pattern across the Atlantic. American escorts were detecting submarines earlier, maneuvering faster, and defending convoys with unprecedented efficiency. In March 1943, the height of the U-boat campaign, Allied losses were severe, but something new was happening beneath the statistics. Escorts were sinking more submarines than before. Wolfpack attacks that once inflicted heavy damage now met coordinated resistance. Radar-directed interceptions reduced the element of surprise that U-boats depended upon. By April and May, the shift became undeniable. According to German naval reports, more than a dozen U-boats were lost in rapid succession. Many were sunk at night or in poor weather, moments when U-boat crews believed they were safest. The shock within the Kriegsmarine was profound. Admiral Karl Donitz, who had built Germany's submarine arm into a formidable force, realized that the ocean battlefield he understood was slipping away. His staff reviewed reports from surviving captains. The same phrases appeared again and again. Escorts altered course toward us without visual contact, attacked from unexpected range, detected us during surface charging, and radar suspected. Despite these warnings, Germany lacked the immediate ability to counter short-wavelength radar. The Metox detector was already outdated. Newer devices were in development. The production delays and Allied air superiority hindered their rollout. U-boat crews became increasingly cautious, limiting surface exposure and reducing battery charging time, changes that weakened operational reach. For the Allies, radar brought a new defensive coherence. Convoys that once struggled to maintain formation now moved with greater confidence. Escort groups communicated radar findings across ships, building a shared picture of the battle. Hunting no longer relied on instinct, it relied on information. The momentum in the Atlantic was shifting, and with each passing week, it became harder for German commanders to ignore the truth. Radar had become a strategic weapon in its own right. As 1943 progressed, the consequences of radar dominance spread through every level of the German naval command. Technical officers pored over reports from returning U-boats, many of which described encounters that defied traditional expectations. Boats detected at extreme ranges, escorts appearing from fog or darkness with no warning, depth charge attacks delivered with precise timing and minimal hesitation. Each account pointed toward a single conclusion. The Americans were relying on an unseen method of detection German crews could neither anticipate nor evade. Donitz convened urgent meetings with engineers and signals experts. The limitations of Metox were now obvious. It could detect older British radar frequencies, but was completely blind to the centimeter band radar used by American ships. New detectors, like Naxos, were proposed. but they arrived slowly and in limited numbers. Even when available, they offered incomplete protection. The rapid pace of American innovation outstripped German adaptation, leaving submarines increasingly exposed. Strategically, this technological imbalance reshaped the Atlantic battle. U-boats spent less time on the surface, reducing their speed and endurance. Wolf-pack coordination suffered as boats struggled to maintain contact in poor visibility without risking detection. Escort carriers, working in tandem with radar-equipped destroyers, extended the Allies' reach far beyond the convoy perimeter. The result was a dramatic shift in losses. By the end of May 1943, Germany lost 41 U-boats in a single month, an unsustainable rate that Dönitz later described as the blackest period of the U-boat arm. Crews returning to port understood that the era of confident night attacks was over. Many spoke bluntly in debriefings, "The enemy sees us before we see him." Allied intelligence also confirmed the shift. Reports from American escort groups consistently noted improved convoy survival rates and declining U-boat effectiveness. Radar was not merely a tool. It had become a decisive strategic factor, altering the balance of power across the Atlantic. And as the tactical picture evolved, a deeper question emerged, one that touched the meaning of technological warfare itself. The story of radar at sea is not simply a tale of machines and measurements. It marks a moment when warfare crossed an invisible threshold, when the ability to sense became as decisive as the ability to strike. German captains, trained in the traditions of stealth and seamanship, suddenly faced an enemy who can pierce darkness itself. Their confusion, their disbelief, and their eventual recognition reflected a broader truth of modern conflict. Technology does not merely support strategy, it reshapes it. For American sailors, radar offered more than an advantage. It offered a way to survive a battlefield with no landmarks, no cover, and no certainty. In the vast, indifferent Atlantic, it became a steady presence, an unseen companion guiding decisions when human senses faltered. By 1943, the outcome of the Atlantic War was no longer defined only by courage or endurance, but by the ability to master information. Radar turned the tide not through noise or spectacle, but through quiet pulses, traveling across cold water, signals that rewrote the balance between hunter and hunted. And in that transformation, the sea itself changed, becoming the first arena where electronic vision proved stronger than darkness.